All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome. I am Renee Barraza. I'm the Director of Communications and Education here at the Interstate Commission on the Potomac River Basin. We refer to ourselves as ICPRB, which is not much better than the full name, but at least it's shorter. We're excited you have joined us for the first event in our 5-part webinar series celebrating our 85th anniversary. You see on the screen the dates and subject matter of our future webinars. If any of them pique your interest and you'd like to sign up, please visit potomacriver.org/webinars. I'm going to cover some logistics while folks are still rolling in, and then I'll introduce our speaker. You do have the ability to come off mute or turn on your video. We encourage you to do that after the presentation if you have a question. However, during the presentation, please keep your mic and camera off. You may have some questions that come up during the presentation. And if you're like me, you also might forget them by the end. So feel free to put them in the chat when you think of them, and then we'll address them when the presentation is over. The webinar is being recorded and will be posted on our YouTube channel. And now for a quick and hopefully fun Potomac River watershed trivia before we get started. Let me launch that. See if it works. All right. While you're answering that, I'll introduce our speaker, Michael Nardolilli, the Executive Director of ICPRB. Michael Nardolilli joined the Interstate Commission on the Potomac River Basin as its Executive Director in 2019. Previously, Mr. Nardolilli held leadership positions at the Northern Virginia Regional Park Authority, the Arlington Outdoor Lab, the Montgomery Parks Foundation, the C&O Canal Trust, and the Northern Virginia Conservation Trust. Prior to his work in the nonprofit field, Mr. Nardolilli had a successful 18-year legal career representing Fortune 500 companies suing their insurance carriers for delayed manifestation claims. All right, I'm going to give you a few more seconds to answer the question. And then I'm going to let Mike give you the correct answer.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Renee. So how many presidents were born in the Potomac River Basin? The correct answer is 4. 4 is the correct answer, and those are George Washington, James Monroe, James Buchanan, and then Woodrow Wilson. So those are the 4 presidents born in the Potomac River Basin. So I'll launch into here on who owns the Potomac and why. Let's get off the screen on the polls there, I guess, right? Or close that off. Renee?
Yep, sorry. Polls always work until they don't work.
Oh, okay.
So off the screen now.
So 50% of you got it right. Congratulations.
Good job.
Okay. So I'd like to start off with just a map of the Potomac River Basin there. So remove the poll results from. Okay. Oh, is that off?
Are they gone now? I can't tell from my end.
Oh, no, I still see it on the screen there, Renee. Okay, well, I hit done and it came off. So
Okay.
if anybody still sees that on the screen, just click on done. So that's a map of the Potomac River Basin there. Oh, I don't see them. Okay. So that's a map of the Potomac River Basin. It's roughly the size of Switzerland. As you see there, it's kind of like a horse head starting from like Stanton, Virginia in the south, all the way down to the Chesapeake Bay. Next slide. So as a disclaimer, I want to say this is for educational purposes only. These are my views. It's not professional advice. Don't attribute it to the ICPRB in any way. And also this discussion concerns jurisdictional boundaries only, not the usage of the river, such as water or oysters or structures such as that. And I would ask everyone to hold their questions to the end. This is a picture of me at the Fairfax Stone, which is the traditional source of the Potomac River. Next slide. So who are we? ICPRB was approved by Congress in 1940 as an interstate compact and really focused on eliminating the pollution of the Potomac River, which had gotten pretty bad by 1940. The compact was amended in 1970 to expand our authority to include water and associated land resources. The important part to remember is that we have no regulatory authority. But we have a great deal of influence through the scientists who work for ICPRB and issue a variety of reports on the river. The signatory jurisdictions are Maryland, Virginia, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, and the District of Columbia. Importantly, not the United States. The United States is not a signatory to the compact. So we are an agency of each signatory jurisdiction, but we are not an agency of the federal government, which these days is a good thing. But so why should we care about things like this? Well, why should you care about the Potomac? Well, the water you drank from your tap this morning came from the Potomac, most likely. The water you used to flush your toilet last night came from the Potomac, more likely. And the water used during your last hospital visit came from the Potomac River. And the water that was used to put out there was a fire in Montgomery County yesterday in Potomac, Maryland, came from the Potomac River. So all that water almost certainly came from the Potomac River. So we all have an interest in the Potomac. But there are two main threats and three main projects underway by ICPRB. Next slide. First threat is contamination. This is a photo of Sugarland Run as a tributary of the Potomac in Algonquian Regional Park in Virginia. And the Colonial Pipeline runs from New York, from Dallas to New York, and crosses the Potomac River. On March 28, 1993, the Colonial Pipeline ruptured and sent 400,000 gallons of diesel oil into the Potomac, shutting down the intakes for the Fairfax water for 2 weeks. Next slide. So the second threat is drought. This is a photo of Great Falls during the drought period of 1965 to 66. I was in D.C. at the time on a visit with my grandparents. And I saw the press release and the photos of Great Falls at the time. And Great Falls had been reduced to a trickle. And you can almost see that little kid in the picture there looking out at Great Falls and saying, where's the water? So those are the two threats. Next slide. So what are our three projects? The first one is to make the water supply of the nation's capital more resilient, both to spills and to droughts. Arlington and Washington, D.C. are the two most vulnerable cities in the U.S. to a cutoff of water supplies for drinking, fire suppression, and hygiene. And in December 2022, ICPRB led the effort to get Congress to pass the Water Resources Development Act, authorizing a regional water supply study, including identifying a secondary water source and additional water storage capability in the National Capital Region. Congress appropriated $500,000 for the study. And we have in the House appropriations bill, there's $1.8 million more if that ever gets passed. There's a 90-10 cost share by the federal government. This feasibility study is estimated to take 6 years and cost $7 million. And if there's any fourth graders on this call, they would probably say 6-7. But anyway, that's a way to remember it. It takes 6 years and costs $7 million. So is there somebody else with their mic on? I hear some laughter. That was pretty good, but let's close off the mics. So this is a photo of Jennings Randolph Reservoir. The water released there would take 9 days to reach the intakes supplying DC area with drinking water. Now the study has been paused by the government shutdown, and we're hoping that once that gets resolved, we'll continue with the study. Next slide. So the second one is improving aquatic habitats. We are investigating the causes and impacts of harmful algal blooms. We had a conference on that on October 22nd, 2025. Also, we are addressing invasive aquatic species such as the blue catfish and the snakehead. We had a conference on that on October 17th, 2024. And we are restoring freshwater mussels to the upper Potomac River. The mussels actually filter water, and so we are using eels to transport the baby mussels upstream. They have a couple of barriers, though, and that's dams 4 and 5, which is a legacy of the C&O Canal. And so we are going to be building eel ladders on those dams to get the eels upstream so that they can transport these baby mussels that are attached to the gills of the eels upstream. Next slide. And our third one is our trying to get limiting of salt use. So ICPRB digitized the records of the Washington Aqueduct, and this heat map shows data from 1940 on the left all the way to 2020, with salt appearing as blue. And these little blue boxes there are the months. So you see that it's more prevalent, of course, in the wintertime. But the important thing to take from this is that the Potomac River is becoming saltier. And we are urging folks to use salt wisely, especially during the winter months. It is very difficult to remove salt from water, from the drinking water. And so we're really worried about this trend that we see in the Potomac River. So next slide. So let's get it on the boundaries. 3 dueling land grants we have to start with. First one went to the Virginia Company. They received land grants from King James I over Virginia, Maryland, Pennsylvania, and North Carolina. The successor in interest to those grants was the Virginia Assembly. There was also a grant by King Charles I to Lord Baltimore, and that grant went from the first fountain, that was the terms they used, the first fountain of the Potomac River, and along its further bank or south shore to the bay, thus granting Maryland ownership of the Potomac River. Now, the third land grant was to Lord Fairfax through this grant in 1688. Then it was passed on to Culpeper, and that's the northern neck boundaries, lying between the Rappahannock and the Potomac rivers from the bay to the so-called Fairfax Line, which connected the head springs or the sources of both the Rappahannock River and the Potomac River. So the real question was, where was the first fountain of the Potomac? Next slide. So Virginia really had an interest in trying to find the source of the Potomac, so they commissioned a bunch of surveyors to go out west. Now, the 1632 grant also set the western boundary of Maryland at a vertical line that ran from the Pennsylvania boundary, or the Mason-Dixon line, southward to the first fountain of the Potomac. So the Virginia survey went upstream. And then near Old Town, Maryland, the surveyors had to make a choice. Are they going to follow the north branch of the Potomac, or they were going to follow the south branch? Now, if they followed the south branch, that's the red line there, Maryland would have been far bigger, and Virginia would have been smaller. Instead, they followed the north branch, and that made the current boundary to the what we call today the Fairfax Stone, and that exists on Fairfax Spring, and that's the sources further east. So they made a decision, and that affected the boundary line between the two states to this day. Next slide. So this is a map of 1736 to 1737, and the key part here is that straight line on the left-hand side. That is a line that runs from the source of the Potomac on the top to the source of the Rappahannock at the bottom. And so this is the boundary of the northern neck. And to orient you on this map, DC is roughly where the letter L appears in the word Maryland. And it really shows the detail of trying to identify where the source of the Potomac was, and which continued to be an issue between the states. Next slide. And so then we have many Potomac River boundary disputes. So, and I want to say this on behalf of Virginia, I'm a Virginian. Virginia relinquished its claim to the Potomac River in the Virginia Constitution. And some people say this is sort of a revolutionary fervor in 1776, but Virginia said, okay, Maryland, you own the river, but we reserve the right to free navigation on the Potomac and the use of the Potomac River itself. Maryland always disputed that. So anyway, George Washington said, enough of this, let's get together. So he called the commissioners from Maryland and Virginia to Mount Vernon. And what came out of that was the Mount Vernon Compact of 1785, which agreed to the free navigation and use of the Potomac River by both states. In those days, you had to pay a tariff to go from Virginia to Maryland, much like a foreign country. But that eliminated this tariff situation between those two states. And then the commissioner said, well, why don't we call more states in and try to resolve the similar boundary disputes between the other states? And so there were a call for more states to join. This led to the Annapolis Convention. And at the Annapolis Convention, they realized that not all the players were there. And so they issued a call for another convention to be held in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So the two takeaways here is the boundary issues were not settled by those conventions, but it did lead to the founding of the United States. The Philadelphia Convention, also known as the Constitutional Convention, of course, then adopted the Constitution of the United States at that point. Next slide. So the two states realized that they had to settle this the boundary dispute, and so they said, okay, let's submit it to arbitration. In 1877, the claim was submitted to arbitration in what's called the Black-Jenkins Award. So Maryland had claimed authority up to the high water mark on the river, but the Black and Jenkins arbiters rejected Maryland's claim to the high water mark because they noted that Virginia had a long-standing land use to the low water mark on the Virginia shore. So the line, would be from the low water mark on the Virginia shore. But then the other question was, okay, what are we going to do about these indentations in the river? Because the river kind of flowed in, you had these large bays. You had Belmont Bay, for example. What would happen in that sort of situation? And they came up with a rule that the line would run what they call from one headland to the next, not along the indentation. So if you go on Google Maps and you look at the boundary line between Maryland and Virginia on the Potomac, you'll see that it goes on a straight line between these indentations. So it goes from one headland to the next. And there was a real dispute about this Hog Island, whether the island was on the Potomac or in the Potomac, and the two states battled off of that. It's sort of irrelevant today because Hog Island is now submerged in the Potomac River. So it was a dispute 1889 that really hasn't had much effect because the island isn't there anymore. So next slide. So anyway, there was a very significant action, Maryland versus West Virginia. And for those who may remember their Constitution, disputes between states go directly to the U.S. Supreme Court. They do not go through any lower courts. They go directly to the Supreme Court. And what happens there is the Supreme Court of the United States, or SCOTUS, usually hires a mediator or somebody with expertise to make a recommendation to them. And this was the process that was followed in the Maryland versus West Virginia lawsuit. SCOTUS determined that the low water mark on the South Bank would give Maryland a uniform boundary to Virginia and West Virginia. So therefore, again, this low water mark on the South Bank. And they held that the Fairfax Stone was the source of the Potomac, given long-standing acceptance in area and land records. Maryland always disputed that. They actually came up with what they called the Potomac Stone as the boundary, which would give them more area. But the Supreme Court said, well, look, this has been accepted by the landowners in the area, and given the fact that it's reflected in the land records, we're going to stick with the Potomac, the Fairfax Stone as the boundary. So then there was a question of, okay, let's draw the line then. And so how are we going to do that? So they came up with what's called the Matthews-Nelson Survey of 1928. And then a commission was formed, the Virginia-Maryland Commission in 1929, and then they placed markers, 58 markers, south of Jones Point. The marker you see on the left there is I took that photograph of the boundary marker at Jones Point, and so you can follow these boundary markers all the way down, going from headland to headland, and they're still there. So it's a very significant development in the relationship between the states. Next slide. So, but why is the Fairfax Stone entirely in West Virginia? If you go out there, it's a West Virginia State Park where you can find the Fairfax Stone. And that's explainable because that's not the southwest corner of Maryland. The stream, the Fairfax Creek or stream, that was used as the boundary actually curves. And if you draw the line down from Pennsylvania, it actually intersects that stream before you get to the Fairfax Stone. And so therefore, since the language was that it's the line extending down to the source of the Potomac, once it crosses that little stream, that's where the boundary is. But you can go there today and look at what's called the southwest corner of Maryland at what's called Monument Number 1, which is not the Fairfax Stone. So it's kind of ironic that the Fairfax Stone is not the boundary line, the southwest corner of the state of Maryland. So it's Monument Number 1. Next slide. So we have a couple of legal issues here, shifting versus fixed boundary theories. So normally a state boundary in the center of a river will shift with gradual changes such as accretion or the gradual accumulation of land, or erosion, which wears away the land, but not by a sudden flood, which is called an avulsion. So you have in the Potomac, in the Mississippi, you see that the Mississippi moves a lot, but because the state boundaries are in the center of the river there, the boundary line does shift with these gradual changes. Not a sudden or a change like a massive flood. The boundary line will stay where it is, but gradual changes like accretion or erosion. But state boundaries that follow the contours of a river, such as the Potomac River, could be either a fixed or a shifting boundary, depending on the historical reasons for the boundary in the first place. And interestingly enough, federal common law of accretion controls state boundary questions. Now, the courts distinguish cases that concern with private ownership from location of interstate boundaries. So you really can't look at issues that are between two landowners and reason there what the interstate boundary would be. There were a bunch of fixed theory decisions came out of the Ohio River cases, and these were determined that the state boundaries were fixed in 1792 when Virginia ceded its western lands. Virginia ceded those lands but retained jurisdiction over the Ohio River to the northern shore. But the point from this point of view is to look at and saying it's not the Ohio River cases were fixed theory decisions. And so should a court follow the decision of the Ohio River cases, or is it a movable boundary? And so that dispute then came to a head in what was called Potomac Shores, which is near Harper's Ferry. So would there be a fixed or shifting boundary on the Potomac? The next slide. And here's a map that shows you the Potomac wayside near Harper's Ferry, and that was the real issue there, whether or not who owned the Potomac wayside and whether or not an outfitter could cross the 150-foot strip there and have access to the Potomac River. So let's look at the next slide. So an adventure outfitter crossed the accreted land to access the Potomac River. The landowner sued, say you were trespassing, and the landowner sued in federal court, arguing that the state boundary was fixed in the past. And the outfitter argued that, wait a second here, the land was accreted to the shoreline, and that was in Virginia because it's a shifting boundary line. So they had to make a determination. The Maryland Court of Special Appeals issued an opinion in Potomac Shores versus River Riders, and they determined that the Virginia's prescriptive rights do extend to the low water mark on the Virginia shore, as would be expected. But the court examined the Black and Jenkins Award and determined that the Potomac River state boundaries are shifting, and so therefore distinguished the fixed Ohio River cases. So the boundary between Maryland and Virginia is the low water on the Virginia shore as it changes over time. So the court then held that the accreted land at issue was in Virginia because of the shifting boundary, and there, because it was a shifting boundary, Maryland courts had no jurisdiction because the land was in Virginia. So it's kind of an interesting case study of how the court reasoned and came up with, I think, was a good conclusion. Next slide. So what do we do about DC? So now DC, of course, is right in the middle there. This is a map of the 40 boundary stones. Most people are familiar with those boundary stones, marking the boundaries of the original District of Columbia. Now, DC was created from both Maryland and Virginia, and so DC had ownership on both sides of the river, including the river bed. So in 1847, there was the Act of Retrocession, where Virginia returned its portion of DC to, returned to Virginia. So where was the new boundary? Now, there was court decisions there. We have the Virginia's prescriptive right against Maryland to the low watermark, but would that apply to DC? Because DC at one time owned both sides of the river. So the boundary between DC and Virginia north of Jones Point and Alexandria and south of Little Falls would be the high water mark along the Virginia shoreline, because there was no prescriptive right of Virginia against DC because DC had owned both sides of the river at one point. But now you had another question. You had silt coming down the river. They altered the shoreline. And also you had dredging operations in and around DC that created new islands. So you had to figure out where was the boundary line there. Next slide. So let's start upstream to look at Antelostan, or Mason's Island, or we know it today as Roosevelt Island. It was owned by Maryland. It was transferred to DC in 1791. And then it was a causeway, some of you may remember, that connected the island to Virginia. And that cut off what was called the Little River, which flowed between Teddy Roosevelt Island and Virginia. Silt started forming the land connection to Virginia, but the ferry that operated between Georgetown and the island, and the Union occupation of the island during the Civil War, kept the island as part of DC. And so therefore, Teddy Roosevelt Island to this day is part of DC. The causeway was later removed, and the Little River now flows again between the Virginia shoreline and the Roosevelt Island, which is part of DC. Next slide. So let's look further downstream about Alexander's Island. This area today is the Pentagon's connector parking lot, but that was once DC's Alexander's Island, and it was part of DC. Now, there was a narrow channel between Alexander's Island and Virginia, and that became silted up by natural processes. And then a development on Alexander's Island became notorious. It became Jackson City. This was a lawless haven for gamblers, mainly because nobody asserted jurisdiction over this slice of land. Virginia officials cracked down on the gambling there, and then DC did not contest the Virginia jurisdiction. So it was kind of odd in that if you looked at it at high tide, it would be clearly a DC island, but a low tide made it part of Virginia. So this was sort of rendered moot by the building of the Pentagon and the filling in water between the island and Virginia to make it clearly part of Virginia. Next slide. Going further downstream, let's look at Columbia Island. This was once mudflats owned by DC. There was dredging and filled dirt and rock from shipping channels that was dumped there. The island created was part of the Arlington Memorial Bridge project. And so the question was that they dug a boundary channel to protect the bridge from these piers from floods. But was this new island part of DC or Virginia? Sort of an interesting sidebar is that that's the site of the proposed triumphant arch by the Trump administration as a welcome to DC. So what was Columbia Island? Was that part of DC or Virginia? Next slide. So going further downstream, the airport that was constructed near Gravelly Point on the mudflats was once part of DC. Dredge materials were dumped there, converting it to dry land. Again, the location between the low water mark now became land above the high water mark. And National Airport opened June 16th, 1941, and now is known as Reagan Washington National Airport, was the new airport in Virginia or in DC. Next slide. So going further downstream, we have the Alexandria Pierhead line. Alexandria landowners extended their property and piers far out in the Potomac River, trying to make as much use of their property as possible. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers surveyed the edge of the waterfront and those improvements along the Potomac. And in 1939, the Army Corps defined a pierhead line from on the Alexandria stretch of the riverfront. Now, is that the boundary between the two states? And so that became another issue. That shows you the piers along the Alexandria waterfront. So next slide. So the dispute finally wound up in Congress. So in 1934, Congress created a three-person DC-Virginia Boundary Commission consisting of a presidential appointee, an appointee from the Virginia governor, and then an appointee chosen by the other two. The commission recommended boundary at the present-day low water mark. There was pushback from the National Capital Planning Commission because they have great ideas for the entranceway to Washington, D.C. And Congress then, in a whole bunch of maneuvering between senators and congressmen, they set the winding boundary at the present-day high water mark, empowering the U.S. Coast and Geodetic Survey to place 15 what they called witness marks on the DC-Virginia boundary. And so they wrote a statute that had this sort of winding boundary coming from Little Falls all the way down to Jones Point, and they wrote that into law. But the question is, how would people know where these boundaries were? And that's the U.S. Coast and Geodetic Survey, who was assigned to place these 15 witness marks on the DC-Virginia boundary. Next slide. So you can find these witness marks. This is the witness mark number 6, which is located on Route 50 bridge over the GW Parkway. And that's a close-up of it, and that's the location of it on the bridge. So that's actually the boundary line between DC and Virginia right there. And like I said, there are 15 of these markers that connect by lines so that you know where you are. Next slide. So this is the language of the statute. I'm not going to read it all, but you can go there and you can look at it. It kind of interested to me that they were concerned with the Arlington, Alexandria, and DC boundary in 1945. You would think they would have better things to do, given World War II and all that stuff. But this really worked its way through the Congress, and they came up with this language, and that's the whole language. And so it starts where the northwest boundary of the District of Columbia intercepts, again, the high water mark on the Virginia shore of the Potomac River, and following it all the way down. And so it goes past the Little River, goes to Boundary Channel, goes all the way down to 2nd Street, Alexandria, and then all the way down to Jones Point, and then the pierhead line along Alexandria. But let's look at what it looks like on the maps. Next slide. So let's look at the first part. Said boundary line shall begin at a point where the northwest boundary of DC intercepts the high water mark on the Virginia shore, following the present mean high water mark. That's in a southerly direction along the Virginia shore of the Potomac River to the Little River. So if you start on the left-hand side of that map, and you can go to Google Maps and you can blow it up to see exactly where it is, but that follows the river all the way down to where you get to Roosevelt Island, and that's the little river, that blue line between Virginia and Teddy Roosevelt Island, and so that's where the boundary is on the northern part. Okay, let's continue with the wording. Next slide. So then it says, along the Virginia shore of the Little River, which is that water between Virginia and Teddy Roosevelt Island, then down to Boundary Channel, and then to the main body of the Potomac River along the Virginia side of the Potomac River, across the mouths of all tributaries. Again, these are sort of the headland to headland affected by the tides of the river. So that brings us all the way down to what is today near National Airport. So now the third part is, what do you do when you get to Alexandria? When you get to Alexandria, it goes to the present established pierhead line. Again, that's from the Army Corps of Engineers, and following said pierhead line to its connection with the District of Columbia, Maryland boundary line. Next, and I just want to point out on that map there, you see the boundary between the states shown there as the headland to headland. It goes up from there's River Farm at the bottom. Some of you may know that the American Horticultural Society is there. But if you follow that straight line all the way up to Jones Park, Jones Point, you'll see that that's exactly what this headland to headland looks like. Next slide. And then finally, what happens when you go south of that, so, the high water mark or the artificial fills and alluvium and erosion, then the boundary shall follow the new mean high water mark on the Virginia shore as altered, or whenever the location of the pierhead line along the Alexandria waterfront is altered, then the boundary line shall follow the new location of the pierhead line. Again, this reflects the shifting boundary, which is the rule in the Potomac River, and not so with other river systems. So the summary there at the bottom, south of Jones Point, it's the low water mark on the Virginia shoreline. In the middle, it's the high water mark on the Virginia shoreline pursuant to the 1945 statute, and north of Little Falls, it's the low water mark on the West Virginia shore. Next slide. So I want to just end here at Jones Point Park because of two things. One is that Jones Point is sort of like this is Alexandria, is sort of ground zero for boundary stones. So if you go there, you can find all these different boundary stones, all these commissions that have determined the boundary of the Potomac River and the boundary between Virginia, Maryland, and DC. And there they are. Some of them are in the weeds, some of them are out in the front, but you can actually then see all these boundary stones. So what I'm proposing that we do on February 23rd, 2026, is to gather at Jones Point Park and celebrate Terminalia. This was the honoring of the Roman god of boundary stones. And so you can celebrate Terminalia at Jones Point Park with us on February 23rd, 2026, which is actually the date of the Roman gods of boundary stones. So it's sort of an odd little tidbit there at the end. Next slide. So we'll open it up to any questions now. I think we made pretty good time, and I appreciated people waiting until now to ask questions. This is a photograph at Point of Rocks. This is where we have our main gauge on the Potomac River to compare the flow of the Potomac River over time. That's at Point of Rocks. That goes back 130 years of data. Okay. Next, so I think I will turn it over to Renee, who is looking at the questions in the chat to select a few questions in the time we have remaining.
Yes, thank you. And I also wanted to give a shout out to Sabrina, who has been sharing the slides. Thank you for doing that, Sabrina.
Thank you, Sabrina.
Got to keep her on our toes the entire hour. So we did have one question in the chat. Is any consideration being given to removing the obsolete upstream Potomac River dams to enable at least greater free flow of the upstream portion of the river?
Well, the main issue there is the fact that those dams 4 and 5, are used for hydropower in Virginia, in West Virginia, and so there's a vested interest in the dam to supply electricity, hydroelectric power there. I'm hearing an echo. Okay,
Yep, there you go. I
so
had to mute somebody.
yeah, so anyway, there have been discussions across the country, of course, on dam removal, but this dam is functioning, and to my knowledge, there's been no serious proposal about removing those dams. But our effort is to try to build these eel ladders around the two dams for getting the eels upstream. Okay.
Okay. Then the next question is, how did the boundary issue affect Maryland versus Virginia 2003 SCOTUS case, in which Maryland lost admin authority over Virginia withdrawals?
A very good question. And that goes back to the Mount Vernon Compact of 1785, in which Virginia was given the right to use the river. And so therefore, Virginia asserted that the Fairfax water could put a intake into the middle of the river. And Maryland said, no, wait a second here, you have to go through our administrative process to do that because Maryland owns the river. Virginia, of course, said, well, we have the right to use the river. And so that went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court sided with Virginia because of the Compact of 1785, and then all of these other agreements between the two states, always indicating that Virginia had the right to use the river. And so therefore the intake was allowed going into the middle of the river.
Thank you. And we did have a question about the recording. It will be available on our YouTube page, as well as I will send out a link to it to anybody that registered for the webinar. Does somebody want to come off mute and ask a question? You have the ability to do that. No? Okay, we did have one more question. As best as can be estimated, how much of Potomac River water is used by DC/Virginia? What's the percent consumed?
Well, you also have the WSSC is in the mix there, and we have a flow by that we maintain for aquatic and environmental needs downstream. So at Little Falls, there's 100 million gallon per day flow by that's required, and so the usage of the Potomac River water by Virginia, DC, and Maryland varies, of course. But the idea is that we maintain at least 100 million gallons of flow by that goes past the intakes, so that the water suppliers don't drink the river dry. And that's very important, both upstream with Great Falls because of the Mather Gorge there, and also downstream for the bay. So it varies depending on the flow of the river and the time of year. For example, more water is used during the summer to water lawns and things like that. So it kind of varies. But the important point to remember is that whatever they're using, they cannot use more than 100 million gallons per day as the water passes by Little Falls.
Thank you for that. And then Suzanne asked, what data do you gather at Point of Rock? She didn't catch it because she lives near there. And I will go ahead and share a link to the Point of Rock gauge. But if you want to speak to that, Mike, that'd be great.
Yeah, so the Point of Rock's gauge will tell you the flow of the Potomac River at that point, and then you can compare it to last year, and you can compare it to the median, the 130-year median, by looking at that graph. Now, some people will look at the graph and say, well, why is there it looks like a wave rather than just a straight line. And the reason for that is the hydroelectric dams upstream, dams 4 and 5, in that they they modify or use the river for hydroelectric power with an eye toward both the flow downstream and what's called a run of the river. It's not this big impoundment. The water actually does flow by it, and it's cut off on occasion, and it's allowed to come by on occasion too, and that creates this variation. But you can see that right on the map on the gauge there at Point of Rocks.
And then we have two kind of similar questions, so I'll ask them at the same time. You mentioned risk of water shortage in Potomac Basin. What kind of solutions could increase water security? And then the other question is, what is potential second source for water supply in upcoming study?
Right, very good questions. We did a study and looked at drought. How can we prepare for drought? The Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments looked at emergency situations such as a contamination event. And both of us came up with a similar recommendation, which was to acquire a quarry that is an ongoing quarry in Potomac, Maryland. It's called Travilla. And the idea would be to acquire that quarry and then fill it up, and that would provide us with a really good backup of water supply in the DC area. Now, the Army Corps of Engineers is looking at a lot of different options. One of them is to use is called water reuse. The water that flows down from Dulles Airport and Montgomery County as sewage winds up going to the Blue Plains treatment plant, which is across the river from Alexandria, Virginia. And that water is treated and released back into the Potomac, and that's a pretty good quality water. And so there's a proposal that maybe what could be done is that there would be another treatment plant located down there, and would take fairly clean water and then make it acceptable for drinking water purposes. So this is called reuse, and that's one of the proposals that's being considered by the Army Corps of Engineers. Others are more fantastical, I think, are such as a big pipeline going from Harper's Ferry down to DC, or maybe having the water from the Susquehanna brought into the Potomac River Basin. I don't think those are very serious, but water reuse, and then I said, like, say, Travilla Quarry, are being seriously considered in this study.
Thank you. And we had, actually, Andrew, would you like to come off mute and ask a question? You have your hand raised. You've been patient. Thank you.
Yeah, is my mic off? Is my mic on?
We can hear you.
Fascinating presentation, Michael. Absolutely fascinating. But I'm glad to hear that there's no huge idiotic interbasin transfers considered for a second water source. You know, you're not going to tap into Lake Erie or anything like this. So anyway, so that's actually kind of, the quarry is actually a good idea. And I mean, that's a backup water source around Leesburg, actually, is another quarry. And then actually the idea of reuse coming out of Blue Plains, that's a pretty interesting idea, to just basically take that effluent and then run it to a water treatment plant. Is that basically the idea?
Yes.
Okay.
And the difficulties with that is that, you know, the Blue Plains is actually at the low point, and to make use of that water, you have to pump it uphill to be of use by the District of Columbia, for example. And it also may not be a true regional solution in and of itself, because of the fact that, you know, how do you get the water to Fairfax? How do you get the water to Montgomery County? So we look at Travilla as an important component of whatever solution comes out of the Army Corps of Engineers, but it could be Travilla Plus. Travilla Plus this water reuse for certain areas of the basin, and so we think that would be a good solution. But we're really hopeful that the study gets on the way again, because you know, we are at risk of having a drought. 1930 we had a drought, 1966 we had a drought in 1999, 2002. So we'll have a drought again. The question is only when, not if. And then finally, we have this contamination possibility hanging over our heads. And that contamination could be either accidental, like the example of the oil spill, or it could be deliberate because of nation's capital being a source of a terrorism attack. So it's really an important thing to try to have a win-win situation where we address both the drought issue and the contamination issue in whatever solution comes out of this study.
Okay. So, and actually the quarry would kind of hit both of those marks.
That is correct, because the quarry would not use the river as a transport system. So if you had contamination on the river and you open the valves from the quarry's reservoir, that would go directly into the water treatment facility. It would not go back into the river. The other reservoirs that we were talking about, Jennings Randolph, for example, that uses the river as a transport system. So if the river was contaminated, maybe that dilutes the contamination a little bit, but that's not a perfect solution. And we have looked at these other cities like Atlanta, for example. They had a 3-day backup of water supply, and they were dependent on one source of water. And so what they did was they acquired a quarry and they filled it up, and now they have a 30-day backup system. So we have precedent to follow by looking at Atlanta and other cities in the country.
Yeah, that sounds great. That sounds absolutely fascinating.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Terrific presentation.
Thank you. So we still have some more questions. You had mentioned the 100 million gallon flow by. How does that compare to the amount that's diverted and used by the DC metro area? And Mike, I did pull up the drought email today, and we used 358 million gallons.
Okay, and I think Alma 2 had a comment in the chat too, right?
Did Alma 2 answer that?
I think she did. So I don't know if you want to read that, or if you can read it.
So we do a daily drought monitoring when the flow at Point of Rocks is below 2,000 cubic feet per second. And that gathers information from all of the water suppliers. And that's what Alma 2, one of our scientists on the co-op team. Co-op is who does that at ICPRB. And she said the Washington metro area utilities withdrawals vary, but can range between 400 million gallons a day to 600 million gallons a day. And also, just in comparison for folks that are not familiar with this kind of language, today's flow on the river is around 1,000 million gallons per day. So that was a lot of numbers.
Okay, I guess we still have 8 minutes, right? So I'm here for the duration.
We had another question about Travilla. Can Travilla be operated as a pump storage facility, i.e. skimming winter flows from the Potomac with 100% refill to assure summer supplemental supply?
Right. That would be the idea, is that when the river was high, the water would be pumped up to the Travilla Quarry. And then when the river is low, it would be opened up and would flow down by gravity to the water supply system. So you're absolutely right. It would involve pumps from the Potomac pumping upstream. And then also, when it would be used, it would be really mostly gravity fed from the water coming down from the quarry. So that's the game plan.
We do have another webinar coming up about water supply, so make sure you check out the different webinars that Serena shared the link in the chat, because it sounds like there's a lot of great questions about that. Another question, would the commission consider a public relations campaign urging the benefits of Potomac River water conservation?
Yes. When we go into daily drought monitoring, which we are in now, this is our 3rd year in a row we've done that. We urge people to use water wisely. That's our mantra. And, we don't want to get into a situation where we have the low flow allocation agreement being triggered, where we actually have to allocate water among the users. And so that's our hope, is that we don't ever get to that point. There is another agreement called the Water Supply Coordination Agreement, which is designed to prevent the low flow allocation agreement from ever being triggered. And we work very closely with the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, who then does the messaging to get out the word about, are we in a drought watch? Are we on is a drought warning? Are we in a voluntary conservation situation? Are we in a mandatory conservation? Those are separate levels of messaging that the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments is involved in. Our focus is on the water supply, but we do urge people now to use water wisely. Remember, this is a resource. Like any resource, it should not be wasted. We urge little things like just turning off the faucet when you brush your teeth. Taking shorter showers. Don't water your lawns excessively, and especially for the salt side. In the winter, only use a cup full of salt, a coffee cup full of salt on a typical driveway or sidewalk. People use too much salt, and then it washes into the streams and helps raise the salt content of the Potomac River. So we are urging people to use salt wisely as well.
Another question, great presentation. The reuse option, is that a decision by the Army Corps and or DC Water, or is it more from the Drinking Water Source Protection Partnership members?
It all depends on what comes out of the Army Corps of Engineers, but that's not the only game in town. DC Water is looking at this separately as something that could help their system. DC Water essentially buys its water from the Army Corps of Engineers at the Washington Aqueduct, so that they are looking at that separately, as well as the Army Corps of Engineers.
And then we had one comment that it was a great presentation, that it should be a, what they say, it should be a PBS special.
Well, sure.
Lots of good information. But that's it on the questions, with 4 minutes to spare, unless anyone wants to come off of mute and ask a question or a last minute question in the chat. It's been a great presentation. Thank you again, Mike. Thank you again, Serena, for sharing the slides.
Thank you, Renee.
I know we all celebrated the rain today, but on a personal note, I'm also celebrating it's not going to rain on Halloween. So I hope you have a great, happy Halloween. Enjoy it. And I think we'll wrap it up here. Oh, I'll limit you. Did you have something to say?
No, she's just clapping.
Just clapping.
Yeah. So yeah, check out the other webinars. This is our 85th anniversary, and I think the communication team has really used the opportunity to get word out on a variety of things that we're working on. There's the slide there. So please sign up for these other webinars as we finish out our 85th year in existence.
Thank you. Have a great day. Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.